Hello, everyone. This week I'm really thinking about the importance of making learning meaningful. When we think about all this change that we've seen in the world, learning really hasn't changed, but the conditions that impact and influence it has. In my latest book, co-authored with Tom Murray, we looked at 8 keys backed by research and evidence that can facilitate a transformation of practice. But when we think about making learning meaningful, it really relies on the opportunities that we create for our learners to own the process, to really not just think at the highest levels of knowledge taxonomy, but also to apply their thinking in relevant and meaningful ways. So as we look to, I'd say, the present and the future, we need to really think about taking that critical lens to our practice. So how do we make learning meaningful for our kids? What do those opportunities look like? It's not as much asking our kids what they learned, but can our kids articulate why they are learning what they're learning and how they will use it outside of school? It's not about preparing kids for something. We need to prepare our kids for anything. So as we look to transforming our practice in order to improve learning, when we think about key behaviors, it really is about creativity. Are we instilling a sense of play, curiosity, dreaming, imagining? Are we creating cultures where it's okay for our kids to fail? Do we create activities and tasks where kids develop resilience and a growth mindset? And, do we actually are able to defer judgment? So as we think about the importance of creativity in making learning meaningful, we also think about how we create a sense of community. When we think about communities, this is all about our learners. Maker spaces are one great way to facilitate a sense of community that's not about grades, not about marks, but about kids identifying a solution and coming up with identifying a problem and coming up with a workable solution. A sense of community in terms of meaningful learning is about, user-centered design, empathy, collaboration, networking, leadership, and global awareness and connections. But it's not just behaviors in terms of creativity and community that are important in terms of making learning meaningful, but also the practices that we instill. This comes back to thinking. If it's easy, it's probably not learning. But when we think about thinking and how that really translates to the real world that means something to our kids, it's about how we plan for thinking, how we design for thinking, having an agile approach, looking at deeper modes of reflection. Every single lesson should provide our opportunities to reflect on what they learned. Thinking about current programs and do they really relate to what we're seeing in the real world, whether it be coding, robotics, automation, artificial intelligence. So when we think about those practices, then it really is about developing competencies. I really believe that the 21st century skills movement has been a little played out. I'm not saying that kids don't need skills, but we're already well into the 21st century, and you could be skilled at something, but in turn totally incompetent. For example, you'd be skilled at throwing a baseball or hitting a baseball, but totally incompetent as to how to play the game. We really need to move from skills to competencies. Competencies take into account skills, knowledge, aptitude, behavior, mindset. So as we think about competencies, are our kids competent in developing projects? Can they plan and deliver real world projects? Are they able to look at problems and come up with ideas that solve those problems in multiple different ways? Are we creating, tenacity, grit, perseverance, passion, all those things in terms of how kids are invested in doing the work? And another competency besides, project delivery, which really takes into critical thinking, is storytelling. When we think about learning, our best storytellers are our kids. The second best storytellers are our teachers. And administrators just get to reap the rewards of all the amazing stories of our kids and our teachers. But when we think about storytelling, every time our kids create something using digital tools, they then have that ability to share it. And that learning journey becomes a story. Stories of how we're following scope and sequence, addressing standards, improving achievement, but also how about we're instilling lifelong learning amongst our learners. So when we think about the importance of storytelling, not just for our kids, think about how meaningful that is in the real world. Whether it is designing a brand, video, marketing, all these things that we see right now in our real world, whether it's commercials, advertisements, is about telling stories. If you don't tell your story, someone else will. And when someone else tells our story, it's not really what we want told. So the whole idea is when we think about making learning meaningful, creativity, sense of community, thinking skills, project delivery, storytelling, how are we instilling that amongst our learners? So when we think about learning, it really comes down, again, to the opportunities that we create. And there's a big difference between instruction and learning. Instruction is what the adult does. Not saying that's bad, but learning is what the kids do. So as we think about empowering our kids to demonstrate learning, to think at the highest levels of knowledge taxonomy, we also have to think about how are they applying their learning in meaningful ways. Can they apply their learning across multiple disciplines? Can they apply their learning to solve real-world predictable problems? Can they apply their learning to solve real-world unpredictable problems? That's how we prepare kids for anything. If we want to future-proof education, future-proof learning, it's about getting our kids to think and allowing them to apply their thinking in a context that resonates and matters with them. So as you think about planning, as you think about curriculum, as you think about culture, think about the opportunities that really allow your learners to find meaning in what they've learned. Until next time, have a great week, everybody.